So Oman. It is a country that is the Switzerland of the Gulf. They strive in Oman to live peaceably with their neighbors, whether it is Saudi Arabia or Iran. We are just a waterway away from Iran. We are a 12-hour drive from Yemen. And when we left here 8 years ago, we never could have imagined the places that God would take us through New York City on our way to this country in the Middle East. We've had new foods. We've eaten goat on the floor of an imam's house. We've jumped off cliffs into lush wadis. We've woken up at 5 a.m. to the call to prayer. We've learned to live in extreme heat. And now anything less than 80 degrees is freezing to us.
Okay.
But even more than these physical experiences, I think what has impacted me the most from my time in Oman is the relationships with the people that I have built there. For example, one of my best friends in the entire world is a man named Shah. His full name is Shah Nawaz Rafiq. His friends and family will simply stick with Shah. If you ask Shah, he would say that he and I are brothers. Actually, one day when Stephanie and the boys were there, they had a scavenger hunt around the marketplace, and somebody came in and he said, "This is my family," to Stephanie and the boys. And I'm sure that that tourist was wondering what this man from Kashmir was doing with an American wife and children. But Shah is a special man. He and I sit together in his shop as he waits for customers to come. We talk about religion. We fight over who gets to buy the next cup of tea. No, we actually wrestle sometimes. And Shah has become so close to us. Our boys have become so close to Shah that they can find his place from anywhere in this convoluted marketplace full of secret passageways and alleys that look the same if you don't know where you're at. One night, Stephanie and I needed to go somewhere for about 6 hours, and all of our usual child care providers were coming to the same event. So we asked Shah if he would be willing to watch our boys for 7 hours. And his face lit up like a Christmas tree. Our plan was to drop our boys off at Shah's shop, and when he closed up that night, he would bring them to our Alma Mater Center and put them to bed in a guest room. Now, if you would have told us 2 years ago that we would have trusted our 2 sons to a Kashmiri carpet merchant, we probably would have told you that you were crazy. That there's no way that we could trust this man from a part of the world who is of a different religion than us to watch our sons, our most treasured people in our lives. Because if you were to read papers, if you watch the news, you would think that this man Shah and I should be natural enemies. He comes from this land between Pakistan and India that's disputed by Pakistan, India, and China. Shah is a Muslim who prays 5 times a day and fasts during Ramadan. But he's a man who also will give us anything in our shop for free, and we struggle to pay him anything for the goods that he gives us. He lets our boys haggle with his customers. And he proudly tells even his Muslim friends that this Christian priest is the same to him as his brother by blood. For me, this is the gospel in action. This is what Muslim Christian relations can look like in our world today. But the story of Shaw is not the only story. It's repeated with an imam named Mustafa. You can see Mustafa's picture on the front of your bulletin, giving my son Colin bunny ears. It's Mustafa's house that we sit on his floor and eat goat and rice with our hands. One time I tried to give him a gift and he wouldn't accept it. I had to hide it in his house so he would find it after we left. The story is repeated with my Pakistani friend who has the entire Quran memorized, who used to hate Americans. He used to hate Christians because of the drones that would strike outside his village. But now, this Pakistani friend comes to my house for Christmas every year. The story is echoed with my friend Samuel, an imam with a beard down to here that he uses to tickle my sons when he holds them. As far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. These are Paul's words to the church in Rome, and it's the verse that is close to my heart as, like that church in Rome, I'm surrounded by people who are not like me. A place where there is a call to prayer 5 times a day, and it wakes people up they're not used to it in the morning. It speaks to me in a land where people around me are dressed in musars and kumas, where women are covered in abayas and hijabs. But in truth, most days it is not hard to live this reality of living peaceably with all. In fact, the hard part about it is trying to outdo my Muslim brothers and sisters in showing love. It's not that all my neighbors are great, but the devout Muslims that I work with every day are some of the most generous and hospitable people that I have ever met. I come back here and I turn on CNN or MSNBC or even Fox News. And I imagine that if you watch these stations or you even read the New York Times, it's hard to meld the world that I'm talking about right now, living this peaceful life with what you see and hear and read. I imagine that you might be wondering, how can this peaceful coexistence exist in a world where the United States has killed over 10,000 people fighting ISIS? I wonder if you can imagine in a world where you hear about beheadings and destruction of churches, how it might be possible for us to live at peace when so much doesn't seem to depend on us. What can we say that might make it stop? What can we do that might help the world to be a more peaceable place? I ask myself the question, is there a way? Is there another choice beyond responding to violence with violence? And when I wonder these things, Paul's words come to my head. As far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. It's tempting. It's tempting to answer violence with violence. It's tempting, I think, to say that drones and airplanes and bombs are okay because that's what violent people deserve to get. But as a Christian, I am convinced that that is not what we are called to do. Instead, we are commanded to love our neighbor and our enemies. That what we are to do in the face of violence, in the face of hatred, that what we are to do is to leave room for God's action. You notice Paul says, God will repay. To leave vengeance to God and God will repay. But it doesn't clearly always say what. And I think that this is difficult for us because we know God to be merciful and compassionate. And when we leave room for God's vengeance, we also leave room for God's mercy and compassion. And I imagine this doesn't always settle well because we as humans do want those who do violence, who do hurt, to be hurt as well. But time and time again, God shows that He is merciful beyond measure and even has mercy for those who commit heinous and horrible acts. When we leave room for God's action, we need to be prepared that God might be as merciful and gracious to our enemies as God has been to us. But here's the other side of the story. Is Muslims, at least the Muslims I know, are taught the same message. That we need to be merciful and compassionate because God is merciful and compassionate. Before every meal, before doing anything of consequence, all my Muslim friends mutter these words. Bism Allah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the All-Merciful, the All-Compassionate. Our Muslim cousins know the same thing that we know. That God is merciful and compassionate and desires for us to live in peace. So I think we need to take a page out of their book. We need to find ways to outdo each other in showing hospitality and graciousness. We need to find ways to engage people in ways that show them that we too as Christians are merciful and gracious because they don't always experience that, even as we don't experience their merciful and graciousness here. This theology, it works both ways, and it works for both groups of people. So my challenge for you today is not to come to Oman, though you're welcome to come to Oman, and I'd love to introduce you to my friends. But what I want to challenge you to do today is to find a Muslim neighbor, to find a business owned by somebody who practices Islam, and to show them hospitality and graciousness. And while it might be hard for some of us, because right now, according to the latest Pew Research, there are only 1 out of every 100 Americans is Muslim. That number is growing, and it's growing fast. And while the U.S. doesn't release numbers of how many people leave America to go fight for ISIS, there are a significant number of American nationals who have gone to fight for ISIS. It's estimated that 20 to 25% of everybody fighting for ISIS is from a Western country, meaning Europe or America. And if we want to create peace there, we need to start by creating peace here. So my challenge to you is find that Muslim shop. Whether it's a coffee shop or a convenience store, they're there. They're out there. Buy from them. Buy goods from them. Eat their food. It's delicious. Treat them with respect. Be curious about where they come from. Ask them what they believe. It's okay. Many Christians in Oman, when I teach classes to Christians, they say, we can talk about Jesus with Muslims. I say, absolutely. They love to talk about Jesus. You might be surprised where it'll lead you. For me, because I sit in my Muslim friend's shop, I actually get a physical ache now when I don't see shop. full of Muslims, and one of the scholars presented and painted Christians in an unfavorable way, stood up and challenged this Muslim scholar on his beliefs because he knows something different, because the Al-Amanah Center has taken time to be his friend. Mustafa, that imam who was giving Colin money years, now in his village, will teach people when they say bad things about Christians what we really believe, because he now knows. We took time 2 years ago to meet with Taha, who's trying to be a military chaplain. And Taha, who is now an imam and now a military chaplain, now knows that Christians are not heretics because some Christians took the time to eat with him and teach him about the Trinity. And even though he doesn't agree with us, he no longer sees us as the enemy. Because when we do, when we leave these doors of hospitality open, when we take that risk to let God's action happen, to let God's mercy and compassion enter in, even though we might want vengeance, amazing things can and do happen. They happen in Oman, they happen in the Emirates, they happen in Jordan, they happen in Palestine, they happen in Syria, they happen in Saudi Arabia, and they can happen here too. In theory, Muslim-Christian relations are not hard at all. But it takes a risk for us to leave what is comfortable, to leave what is familiar, and to live out those words of Paul that as far as it depends on us, and a great deal does depend on us, to live peaceably with all. In the name of the one who was, and who is, and who is to come. Let us pray. Gracious God, who is God here in America, who is God in the Gulf, who is God of Christians and Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists, who is God of all people, for we are all your creation. We pray that you teach us to love, that you teach us to put vengeance and violence aside and to be merciful and compassionate to all, that you show us the ways in which we can affect peace in this world, even if it is as simple as saying hi to someone who is different. Even so, come